I'm here with Adam, who's a computer science student running for president. Adam, do you want to tell us a bit about your manifesto?
Yeah, I think if students are reading my manifesto, they'll notice it's a little bit different from other people's, right? I think the approach I took is that I'm not really... when I look at all the manifestos in the past, right, they've promised a lot of things. Some of those things have been actually granted, right? I remember it's a bit of a meme, actually, like £1 bus fares. That's always talked about, right? But in reality, I think the problems students are facing go much deeper. I actually follow this Instagram page, Lancaster Fest, and it's like every third post on that is students talk about how much they're struggling with university. A large part of that is the fact that it's been massively marketized. You have just the absolute denigration of student culture. You have the fact that bars are being closed. My favourite bar, Bowling Bar, that got closed, which is absolutely tragic. And students are paying outrageous fees for an education system which just isn't very good. It's been consistently on the decline. And what's needed is not simply a single person to go into the SU and propose certain reforms. What is needed is a mass campaign. What I am trying to give the students is the opportunity to make that change for themselves, for a national campaign on the basis of working with the workers at the university who are already starting to move to strike because their jobs are being cut.
Now, I suppose the first question would be, you mentioned sort of the meme of promises like £1 bus fares and things which we kind of all like to see happen, but realistically aren't going to happen. So I suppose when you look at your manifesto, the big difference would be you're advocating for some pretty big changes.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'd mind me saying, I don't think it's likely that you're going to get them all passed in the next year if you're elected. So what's exactly is the point of your campaign then?
That's a great question. I guess my point of the campaign isn't to come in and do some minor reforms. It's to lay the basis for a student movement, which is exactly what is required in order to actually change any of the things that are plaguing our university and our society in general, right? Yeah, I guess the point is that all of these things are not actually that crazy, right? Let's take the abolishment of tuition fees, for example. That might seem like a crazy ask, right? That's £9,000. Where's the university going to get that money from? Well, I'll just say that in 1998, we didn't have tuition fees, right? It has been a systematic cutting of government spending into universities that has meant that even though we're paying £9,000 a year now, our quality of education, the funding to our universities hasn't actually increased. It's actually the same because public funding has been absolutely gutted, right? And there's so much wealth in society. It's just being squandered by basically big banks and businesses.
I mean, that being said, though, we've got the Labour Party in government at the moment, and they've not given any commitments to abolishing tuition fees. I can't imagine the Conservative Party about to come to come around and support it. I can't say I know what Reform UK's position is off the top of my head either, but even if we didn't have tuition fees in the past, realistically, the government's not going to abolish them in the near future. So what's the point of calling for a change like that?
I mean, I agree 100%. Sir Keir Starmer is not going to be reducing tuition fees. Sir Keir Starmer.
Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah. I mean, when you're refusing to scrap benefit caps for children, and we have 3.5 million children in this country that are in food poverty, I'd say, what has Sir Keir Starmer actually done for these people, right? Oh, no, I agree. All of these parties, none of them will fix any of these issues, right? And they won't, because they're tied hand and foot to the system, which perpetuates these issues, right? Yeah, I'm not a parliamentary guy. I think, Parliament is basically a ruse. When we have a Prime Minister that's come in, which only 20% of people in this country who are able to vote voted for Keir Starmer, even though he had his landslide victory. Where was the left wing? There's no left wing in this country. That's not necessarily a pessimistic thing, though. The point is that we have to build it. And the parties of the past have been built not, by, proposing global reform, but by the mass movement of the students and workers, right? That's actually exactly how the Labour Party started before it degenerated so poorly.
But I suppose the question then would be, do you really think Lancaster University is the centre of a future British socialist revolution, then that seems like a bit of a lofty goal, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I would say that it's not just me that is running on this kind of a campaign. I know of in Cardiff, there are 400 lecturers being sacked, I believe. And on that basis, there's a very radical SU campaign that's very similar to mine. They're in Leeds. Actually, I know in Leeds, there's one person who tried to run on a communist program, and they got banned for it. But on that basis, they have won over massive amounts of students on that campus. I believe in Sheffield, they're running. It is not just me. And I think you see students all over the country, and indeed all over the world, are waking up to the kind of decrepit system we are living in. And the fact that change can occur, but only on the basis of a mass coordinated campaign, which is what I want to help build, starting in Lancaster, but of course also all of these places, right?
So if the focus then of your presidency, if you were to win, would be on building a national movement and a national campaign, what does that mean for day-to-day life for the students at Lancaster? Would that leave them without a president who's going to meetings about issues affecting the colleges and the JCRs, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the JCRs are absolutely, they're like good. I actually know a few of them, but they're absolutely shafted by the university insofar as like they're student representatives, but are they actually consulted on a lot of the major decisions? Not really, right? Like, for example, Bollard Bar got closed. Did the JCR get brought into the discussion around that? No, they got notified after the decision had been made, right? Yeah, these meetings are well and good with the JCR. They're important, right? I will do those things. But actually, like, these meetings will not fix anything.
Now, in the case of the bars, what would you like to see happen there? Would you like to see the bars reopen as they were? Would you like to see them turned into another sort of social space? What would you like to see happen to Lonsdale and Boland's bars?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily that I have like a particular position on this, right? It's not that I necessarily want to see a reinstating of the bar as it was. First of all, I would like it in-house. Like, I'm pretty sure all the bars are actually basically private businesses that are rented out by the university on some level. They're not entirely run by the university, I don't believe. But on this, like, I think students, regardless of what I think, students are the ones that should have a say on what these buildings are actually used for. I think, like, I would like the return of the bar. I would also like the return. They used to sell, like, these amazing pies in Boland Bar. That got cut as well. Like, there was other things. It wasn't just a bar, it was a hub for social activity. I don't even really drink that much. So.
A campaign of pies, land and bread, then.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's perhaps, forgive me, a bit of a contrast. On the one hand, a big national campaign for socialism in Britain, then also reopening the bars, which is a specific issue and one which a lot of candidates have touched on. But do you think that you'd struggle to engage with the university for the fact that you're out here calling for a communist programme for LUSU, the fact that you're calling for the abolition of the university administration? Do you not think that would harm LUSU's ability to work with the university where it has to?
I think we have spent so many years trying to dilute our movement in order to appeal to the university management. This is exactly what I would say was the probably one of the weaker parts of the encampment last year. What did they do? I mean, what did we do? Because I was involved in that on some level, right? Well, ended up like just trying to talk things out with management, who of course just stalled out negotiations because they weren't actually interested in dealing with the issue. They were interested in kind of clearing these people away.
I mean, it can't have helped that you stormed into the Vice-Chancellor's office, though. That probably soured negotiations somewhat.
Yeah, I mean, like, the Vice-Chancellor, I mean, first of all, I wasn't involved in that, right? And that was a decision necessarily made by the encampment. But also, I mean, this is a Vice-Chancellor who's paid a ridiculous amount, was at the same time is attacking, like, our bars, is attacking our, like, staff, right? Like, I'm not going to cry tears over the Vice-Chancellor in this case, I don't know. But
you can't simultaneously be trying to engage in, formal negotiations and raiding his office, though. Those are contradictory strategies, surely.
Yeah, well, I'm not for raiding his office. I'm for mass action on the parts of the students and staff, right? Which I think is very different, right? I would like to see a real connection between the students on campus and unions like the UCU. We also have our cleaners, our security staff. our porters, right? All of these people in society, I would say, like, yeah, another failure of the encampment. The encampment was it was orientated in the wrong way. It should have been turned towards the students. In fact, this is repeatedly what I tried to do, and many others in the encampment. It wasn't about the management. It never really was about the management. It was about reaching as many people as possible, spreading awareness of the policies there and organising them.
But like it or not, the SU gets the vast majority of its funding from the university. With the policies you're calling for, if you're elected, do you not think that would put the SU's funding in jeopardy? Do you not think that would put a lot of the vital student services that the SU provides at risk of being cut, because the university presumably isn't going to be too fond to fund a communist students' union?
Yeah, well, I think we should. I think that's a very good point, right? The SU is held hostage by the politics of the management, and in fact, this is a massive issue. Why is the SU funded by a management in this way when often the interests of the students and the management come into conflict when you have a management that are pursuing profits? And maybe they would try and withdraw funding and all these things, but that's precisely why we cannot merely stop and cower before these people, but actually have to launch a campaign.
It's a good point that perhaps the SU ought not be so dependent on the university for its funding when there are times where it has to stand against the university, but like it or not, there's a lot of good which the SU does for students, and at the moment, without university funding, it would not be able to do that. What about the people who rely on the food pantry that the SU puts on in order to get a meal? What about the people who rely on student services to receive support after going through sexual assault or harassment or hate crimes? Would they not be in a much worse place if the students' union was effectively defunded by the university because the university refuses to take it seriously as an organisation?
I mean, all the people you have described affected by these different issues are currently in an awful position because of the general crisis in society, the crisis of capitalism and the crisis of the university. Take the labour pantry, the pantry, right? Yeah, you could talk about the university providing food for these people, whilst at the same time they're firing students working at the bars that they're closing with 5 days notice.
Now,
right?
as far as I understand it, none of the students have been fired. They might obviously have significantly reduced hours, but I believe they are still on the payroll technically, but I believe it's a 0 hours contract. I don't know the specifics, but
I feel like there's a bit of a sleight of hand in language. Mm-hmm. But and also on the issue of racism and sexism and all these things and sexual violence, right? Yeah, well, if the university is continuing to defund these things anyway, then I don't think the threat of them defunding it further is a good reason to not ask for even more. What I'm campaigning for is fundamentally even more funding for these social services, right? Which is possible, but also the fact that these things are deep rooted in wider society, right?
Okay, but fundamentally, what you're calling for in your campaign, they're long-term objectives.
Yeah.
The short-term effect would be drastic cuts to the SU. What do you do in the interim for the people who need that support now? Today, it's not much comfort to hear that, well, if we keep at this for 20 years straight, maybe we'll have a socialist economic system which will make everything better.
All of the services you're describing, all of the concessions have only been made on the basis of the kind of radical movement I am talking about. For example, women would not even have the vote if it weren't for the brave actions of working class women continually striking, right? The civil rights movement in America, and indeed the movement against racism all across the world, was built on the power of the working class. And those things are being taken away. Our NHS is being privatised, regardless of whether we're enacting socialism, right? These things will be cut. They are being cut, and the only solution is what I'm providing.
But when you look at those historical examples, what they have in common is those are people who are choosing to strike, who are choosing to fight. If you were to be elected and to go through with this programme, a lot of people who might not choose to fight would still be deprived of these services in the meantime. They'd have no say in that. Is that not anti-democratic?
Well, I say, for all the people that want to vote for me, that is what you're voting for. You're voting for launching a massive campaign, and if you vote for me on that basis, you're committing yourself to being part of that. right?
But what about the people who don't vote for you but are strapped along for the ride all the same?
Yeah, but I don't think it's like I'm not proposing that we just the SU are like go in like a bull in a china shop and just attack the vice chancellor or something. Right?
But realistically, don't you think it's going to harm the SU's ability to get things done if the SU would, I think we can say as a matter of fact, probably have a worse working relationship with the university if its president is a communist. I think we can probably agree on that. Pragmatically speaking, for the people who might not want to vote for you, they would still be negatively affected by the ramifications of that. Is that fair?
I think this is always said, right, that there's this idea that, like, a revolution isn't democratic. And we're not even talking about revolution here. We're just talking about launching a mass campaign, right? Mm-hmm. I would say if people don't want to see that, like, I will obviously not put in jeopardy the mass of students unless it is, like, necessary, right? In reality, like, I think students do want this. I saw a poll in Channel 4 that 47% of young people think that we need revolution. Like, and I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about quite reasonable demands on the face of it, right? Our education should not be subject to basically profiteering, right? And going even further, right? I see like something like 20% of young people, according to YouGov, are like open communists. Far more of the student base are open to the ideas I'm talking about. I think you'll see that in the campaign itself. And the people, like, it is impossible to get an official stamp of, like, I don't know, 80% of the students, because the bar will always be raised, by the way. If I say, if 51% of students vote for me, they will say, what about the 49%? Yeah, that will always happen, right?
Of course, but my concern is that when you're proposing radical action, there'll be people who benefit radically and there'll be people who didn't vote for you who will be radically upset. If you elect, a more compromised candidate, maybe not a lot of people have strong feelings, but that means no strong negative feelings either. What's your pitch for strong absolute change? Because that's really what your campaign is all about, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the situation you're describing, going into a more moderate candidate is posed instead of a more radical one, is precisely the situation that is happening in our country and worldwide that has given rise to the far right. The centre have been completely incapable of answering any of the problems around education, around the NHS, around any of these things that gives ground to, like, the far right extremists, right? Like, it's precisely on that anger that people are campaigning on. This idea of a lesser evil, I think, is ridiculous. It's exactly what has brought Donald Trump into power, right? Those kind of policies have never worked. Remember, lesser evilism was very popular in Germany in the 1930s and the 1920s. I think it's not a viable way to fix our situation. And when a moderate candidate comes in and they are unable to defend against the cuts because they need to rely on the masses to do that, you will see a rise in much more toxic and dangerous politics.
So in this case, you want to sort of draw the line here for the university and the SU. You're then a bit of a what's the Spanish expression? No pasaran, is it? But right, if we move on to the topic of strikes, so it's something I've been asking every president about. But I think of the presidential candidates, you've got probably the most clear position. But to ask perhaps a redundant question. If the UCU, the Lecturers' Union, were to strike over job cuts, would you support that?
Yes.
Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a lecturer, lecturers do not want to strike, especially. Like, if you're, like, working in Tesco's, it's a bit less emotionally impactful to strike. Lecturers especially do not want to strike because it impacts their students' education. My first year, there was a lot of strikes. I was down at the picket basically every day. They even gave me a hat for it. They either UCU beanie. Should have brought it today. And yeah, these are people, when you talk to them, they do not want to strike, but they are forced by awful conditions. In fact, the university has announced 10 to 15% more cuts, which is why they're looking to strike, right? And for the students, this impacts your education, right? You have a direct interest in supporting the striking workers. who are striking fundamentally for not just because they're greedy or whatever, but for better conditions and better education.
Now, as much as having more lecturers and lecturers who are well looked after and well paid is, of course, good for academic quality, there are a lot of students who would say what's particularly bad for the quality of your education is strikes and marking and assessment boycotts, though. Are you confident that the majority of the student body would support an absolute, a policy of absolute support for UCU strikes, of absolute solidarity between LUSU and the UCU, so to speak?
Yeah, I think 100% the students will support that. I've seen this over the last 3 years. People get upset about those things, right? That is an impact on your education. But also all the same people and much more, many more people do see basically the truth, which is that our education has gotten worse and worse. When I'm in a computer science lecture with 250 other people, and I want to go and talk to my lecturer at the end, and there's a queue of 15 other people who also want to do the same, I am seeing the direct impact of the fact that the university refuses to lighten the workload of these lecturers.
And just quickly, as a final question, you mentioned your involvement last year in the Palestine encampment on campus, which took up a large part of Alex Square for most of summer term. So are you in favour of big student protests and movements like that in general? What if a similar thing were to happen, but it was over a cause you didn't support? Say in the case of the Palestine encampment, if there were to be a pro-Israel encampment, would you still support the students' right to take part in that?
I mean, people have a right to protest, right? But I think like the idea that those two things are equal is a very convenient myth for a lot of people, right? Like there's obviously not, this is a very false equality. But yeah, like students have a right to protest. The SU has no right to go in and attack like protesters. But I am under no compulsion to support that kind of movement.
Mm-hmm. But you're still, regardless of what they're expressing, happy to support the students' right to protest?
Yeah, I mean, students have a right to protest. That is like a very important part, right? Communists get this all the time, right? You want to squash the people's right. No, like I'm 100% in favour of free speech. Free speech is very important, right?
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm here with Ben Carter, who's a mathematics student running for president. Ben, do you want to run us through your manifesto quickly?
So I've got 3 key points in my manifesto. Firstly, is transparency. Currently the SU isn't that transparent. People don't know what the SU is doing. So I think we need to have an SU that is talking to students, is there with students in all cases. My second point is sustainability, and I mean that in the sense of climate action. I think the SU needs to do a lot more for its climate sustainability and perhaps the SU for climate sustainability. But also sustainability means an SU that is going to work for many years going forward, a UA that is representative of students that could hold on to that. My third point is rent freezes, rent controls. I believe that this is something that is deeply affecting the majority of students who live on campus. Our rent prices have outpaced nearly every university. They are beyond 50% of the maximum student loan. It's something that's not sustainable and it needs to change.
Now, if we start talking about transparency, you've said in your manifesto that you want to improve communications. You've talked about open forums between the officers and students, and you've talked about reforming union assembly as well. Could you explain a little bit more about your precise plans there?
Okay, so first thing that I would do is set up an open forum probably once a month, where myself and the other VPs are there accountable to students in the lecture theatre, giving an update on where we are and then having an open question for them. I'd also ask that this be broadcast as well to allow students the chance to come online if they're not able to come in person. With the UA, I think currently the UA has sports society presidents as members. I think that's a brilliant thing, but it needs to be expanded. The majority of students aren't part of sports societies, but a lot of students are part of societies. I think the presidents of the large societies should be members of the UA, giving all students an avenue to speak on them. To be
clear, societies and sports are equally represented on Union Assembly. 6 people from student societies are on Union Assembly, including myself as the representative for student media groups.
Yeah, so currently we do have some presidents represented, but it is not a clear system, it is not a fair system. Basically, currently the way it works, you may correct me here, is the majority of the majority of societies are unrepresented. A few sports societies have representative. A few other societies have a joint member representing them. But currently, a big one is like computer science society, the largest society on campus, is completely unrepresented in UA, apart from their president is part of the team that appoints someone. In sheer numbers, they should rightfully have their own seat.
Is there potentially not a problem though with too many people on Union Assembly? Because I've been in the meetings and I can tell you that some of them are quite long already. If we bring another however many people into the room, is that not risking just...
I've been to these meetings myself, and I think saying, oh, you've got too much representation, I think that is a non-issue. I think having more people as members, necessarily like every member is bringing up an issue, but every member is there to speak the voice of the students that they represent. But I don't think you can have too many members. I think these meetings do go on for a while. If anyone's ever been to them, they do drag on a bit, but I think that is a necessary evil.
Mm-hmm. So would you want like all societies over a certain threshold of members to be represented at Union Assembly, or would it just be particular individual ones? How would you want to legislate it?
Yeah, so I'm still in discussions with different society leaders about how they think they should be best represented. But currently I would say there should be a certain threshold. But then I think that can leave small societies in the lurch. So I think for them, if small societies, say all the green societies, so climate action, eco campus, if they had one collective representative that they decided on internally.
I mean, that's kind of the system we have at the moment, though. The societies are split up into 6 categories, and the executives from the societies on each of those categories have the right to vote to elect their representative. So, for example, student media is a small one. It represents LU1 TV, Bailrigg FM, Scan, and Take Two Cinema, and the people from the executives who were present at the meeting where the society's representatives were elected me, and now I sit on the society's committee and Union Assembly. So that's quite similar to the system, except that you just want large societies to have direct representation additionally. Yeah,
so large societies have direct representation, and also expanding this to other societies that currently aren't part of the system.
Mm-hmm. Well, every society is part of the system at the moment, as long as they're affiliated with the SU. They're split into one of the categories. I suppose I'm just a bit confused about precisely what size you'd want Union Assembly to be, because it sits at, I believe, 20 to 30 members at the moment. I could be wrong on that. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Yes, I believe currently sit 32 people.
Okay.
I'm sure you know that the majority of people don't actually show up to these meetings. I know the JTR presidents are quite bad at showing up to these meetings.
At least in my experience, the majority of them do tend to show up quite consistently, I think. But go ahead. I've not been to many UA meetings. The ones I have been to haven't had great JCR representation. But overall, as I said, like, a lot of societies aren't properly represented, and even when they are, students don't understand this system. So even just promoting this system to societies, that people know that they have a UA representative, is something that needs to be done. Now, if we move on to the topic of rent control, it's one which a lot of people are talking about. Rent, especially on campus, is getting increasingly expensive, and student loans aren't rising to catch up with that. Now, one response which the university has is that the majority of accommodation on campus, actually the rent price isn't set by the university, it's set by a private company. How would you plan to help put rent freezes in place when even the university doesn't have that power with about 2/3 of on-campus?
So the majority of university accommodation, although owned by the university, is managed by a private company. Basically how the majority of tenants' unions negotiate with groups. I think firstly, negotiating with these groups, explaining that that these rent increases are not sustainable. And then if it came to more drastic actions such as rent strikes, other forms of student protest. I think the SU is in a great position to organise these to support students in this difficult, what would be a difficult legal time.
So you'd be in favour potentially of a rent strike if the university didn't agree to rent freezes?
Yeah, I think a rent strike is something that may be necessary. I think it should be a last resort, but currently the private companies and the university are pushing us towards that decision.
Because we've seen that at other universities such as Manchester, and there it's resulted in legal action being taken against individual students, which obviously causes a lot of stress, a lot of panic. Do you think it's something which is still worth it when it means individual students could be targeted quite punitively by a large body?
Well, I don't think anyone should be forced into this. It would be an individual decision, but I think the majority of students who are dealing with these rent issues would be willingly part of it. And then, of course, there is many issues with legal challenges and distress, and I think the SU should be there to support them. Like with many legal issues that students are coming onto on campus with protests as well. Just the SU being there, the SU being clear on their support and standing by these students means a lot in itself, not to mention the powers that the SU has in itself.
Now, on the topic of student-led protests, you mentioned that in your manifesto as well on wanting to amplify student voices and support student-led movements. Now, a big point of discussion there obviously would be in summer term of last year there was a pro-Palestine encampment on campus. They occupied Alex Square for a large part of that term. Is that a movement which you yourself were in favour of? And if something like that were to happen again over this cause or a similar one, is that something you'd personally support?
So I am personally in support of the Palestine protests, but I think beyond that, like, if there was a protest on campus that I did not support, that is still the student voice. That is still students wanting themselves to be heard. I think we do have to balance how other students are impacted, but in most cases, the Palestine encampment didn't overly affect other students. There may be future cases where it does affect other students, at which point that needs to be balanced. But in general, the LUSU should be supporting the all-student voice, even when the president disagrees with it, even when the SU leadership disagrees with it, because the freedom of speech of students is the most important thing, and LUSU should be there to defend them in all cases.
How do you balance that, though, in cases where students might be saying things that LUSU not only does not endorse, but is explicitly fighting against? How do you run the double duty of supporting those students in their right to free expression whilst working with the SU to promote kind of the opposite goal? If you like, say, for example, if there were to be protests against EDI initiatives or something like that, which the SU was undertaking, how would you simultaneously support the student voices there whilst working to achieve what they're protesting against?
Oh, yeah. So an example of if there was protests against EDI, one thing is, like, these students that are protesting, if you're protesting, it's because you're being unheard. So reaching out to students, actually hearing them, understanding their concerns. I think it'll be a very rare case that someone is completely against EDI. They may have issues with the way EDI has been implemented, at which point those concerns can be addressed. And even when they were doing something that was against general student voice, I think they should still be allowed to have their protest. And the SU would have to hear them and then probably continue to go through the project, but while hearing these students. And also, if there's a protest, it's a good time to say, wait a minute, we should go back to students, hear what the general student voice is. That may be through questionnaires, that even maybe through a referendum, to just ensure that as we do things, we have constant student support.
Mm-hmm. Now, to go back to the topic of strikes, albeit slightly different ones, we've seen with the redundancies, both voluntary and potentially involuntary, which are being made across universities in the UK, including here at Lancaster. There's very much the potential in the next academic year that the UCU, the Lecturers' Union, will announce strike plans. If that were to happen, would you support them in that?
Yeah, I always support. I think any union action is the voice of the people going forth. The Students' Union is a union itself, and it should agree with the strikes of lecturers. Of course, there's issues of people's education suffering because of that. I think the main thing is just to keep sure that the university takes in proper accountment for this, keep sure that students do still get the education they need, and especially still get the accreditation when worthy, and which majority of students will be. So yeah.
Sorry. No, that's okay.
Yeah. I haven't put much thought into this directly. I'm really glad you've raised it at CERN. But yeah, when necessary and when lecturers are going on strike, we should go on strike. But there does need to be a balance for students to still get their education, to still be to still get accredited, which I think has currently not been done perfectly, but can be done better. And the main thing is LUSU should be there to support students when they have issues on an individual basis and on a mass issue.
So if we cast our minds back, for example, to nearly 2 years ago now, I think it was the marking and assessment boycott around the end of, it would have been the summer of 2023, I think, and there were issues there at some universities with, as you say, students not receiving accreditation for their degrees because their final work hadn't been marked due to lecturers being on strike. At Lancaster, I believe the policy in place was you'd be given your provisional grades, your grade could go up, but it couldn't go down following proper marking. Do you think that's a position which was handled well if there were to be another marking and assessment boycott? Is that something which you'd support as well, or in your opinion, would that be a bridge too far in terms of the impact on students?
I think I can't speak for any individual person. Maybe there were people who had issues with that, and I would love to hear that, and I would love to help those. But from the people I know and from what I've heard, that system went quite well for the majority of students. I think the agreement of your grade cannot go down is a brilliant agreement. One big thing is we should avoid these strikes happening at all, and that is in partnering with where possible, supporting these strikes and these unions not supporting the strikes, supporting these unions so that lecturers don't have to go on strike, because the issues that lecturers are striking for often affect students as well. It is management of the university not working for both staff and students, so we are united in that.
Mm-hmm. Now, to turn to you and your experience a bit, a lot of people who run for president of LUSU have experience as president of one of the JCRs. Now, you've not. Can you talk about what experience you've got and how you think that's prepared you for the role?
So in my first year I was an academic rep. That gave me much experience dealing with university boards on the department level. Since then I have been a society president where I have learned how to manage a team, and on top of that I have been a campaigner for multiple for 2-3 years now. I've been campaigning in the university on many different issues. It has given me an insight to how LUSU works. And to be honest, I think the fact that I am a bit of an outsider is a benefit to me. I think I'm someone who can actually bring change, who is different from the normal body of people who are normally voters into these positions, who often just continue the status quo.
Now, part of the president's job, though, is working with the colleges and with the college presidents in particular and coordinating work between LUSU and the JCRs. Do you think maybe that's a bit of a weak spot for you because you've not got that college experience, or is that giving you another perspective on how to approach colleges? Like, how would this impact how you work alongside the colleges, do you think?
I don't think it will deeply impact the way I work with colleges. I have much experience working with the colleges as an outsider, so that just gives me the better strength for representing students. In this, I am used to being the outsider, trying to petition colleges, trying to petition LUSU. So when I'm approached by a student with an issue, I can bring that up better. I already know the path that they're going to have to struggle through, and I can lead them on that. And I think the JCR presidents are perfectly happy to work with anybody, and I'm not completely unknowledgeable of how the system works. I know how it works, but just because I've not been a president before doesn't mean I can't work with them well.
Now, it's a bit of a time of a lot of change here at Lancaster University. We'll be getting a new Vice-Chancellor at the start of the new academic year. The curriculum transformation programme's underway as well, so there's a lot of opportunities right now to change both the SU's relationship with the university and the way that the university works for students. Are there any particular projects or focuses that you'd really like to promote in this sort of window of opportunity, if you like?
So there's a lot of sustainability campaigns, sustainability in climate action, sustainability in other methods that I really want to see go through. I think one big thing is like our catering system that needs to be sustainable and accessible. It currently isn't. As in the campaign, I've already worked with the catering manager of the university to get things through on that end. On the academic side of things, on the changes there, I currently don't have any direct plans, but I think if I go in with too many plans, then that says that I'm going in for myself. I'm going in for my own beliefs. I'm going in for students. I want students to be able to come to me and listen to them, and I will listen to them, and I will put through what they want. It shouldn't be what I want. It should be what you want.
Thank you very much, Ben. I'm here with Ollie, who's a PPE student running for president. Ollie, do you want to run us through your manifesto quickly?
Yeah, so my manifesto, I'll run you through the different points. So the first point is, this is a priority that I think I'd like to do during my term if you were to vote for me, to make campus life more affordable. I'll go about that by doing a rent freeze, by working with Stagecoach, by having a free sugar bus. Then the second point would be a complete overview/review of the relationship between college JCRs and college sport teams and LUSU, because I feel like there's a bit of a distance there that could definitely be solved on both sides. And then my third term is to make LUSU more transparent, more improve their communication, which I think is a resounding feature from LUSU in the last couple of years. I haven't spoke to many students. They don't feel like LUSU is transparent enough or communicate well enough with their student leaders and their student body. Overall, I'm running on the platform of trying to make the union more student-led, student-focused. My perfect union is a union that serves, listens and delivers for the students at hand, and if you vote for me, that's certainly what I'll attempt to do.
So if we start off with the topic of rent control, you've got a bit of pedigree in the subject, having recently formed the Tenants Union. Do you want to talk a little bit about that to begin with?
Yeah, so the Tenants Union is something that myself and Emily Wood set up a few weeks ago at the start of this term. We worked in conjunction with local councillors. We started on Instagram, we got a WhatsApp. I'm sure Josie remembers when we passed through motions in New Way to get the union to support and advocate for our cause. Essentially, the Tenants Union, it supports students that are living on campus and off campus with the aim of lobbying for decreased campus rent. We started the Tenants Union initially because it gives us a platform to discuss the issues rather than just happening intermittently between different people. Makes us more unified in our approach. And this is work that I'd love to carry on as LUSU president on a larger platform.
Now, to talk about some of the issues around rent control at the university, one of the big ones is that about 2/3 of accommodation on campus, the rent's not actually in the university's control. So it's not even a case of directly pressuring the university, it's either indirectly pressuring that private company or pressuring both the university and them. So could you explain in a little bit more detail exactly what your strategy would be to try and push rent down?
Yeah, of course. So the university, in the most part, are tied to a contract with UPP. You've probably seen UPP folk walking up and down campus, fixing new accommodation. My aim for the main 2/3 of the campus accommodation would be for the university to not increase their rent by a contractual amount. From my understanding, the university have been doing this in previous years, so they're making a profit off of that. I think this is something that really shouldn't happen. I think that the university needs to prioritise how much money is in students' back pockets rather than anything else. And that is how I will go about lobbying the university.
So for those 2/3, you'd want to cap rent increases at the contractual minimum then, or?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay. And for the remaining 1/3 or so in direct university ownership, what would be the strategy there?
So a lot of the issues with what we've done at the moment is that we actually don't have a lot of information. The university doesn't publish any information about the rent on campus, so we aren't sure what them 2/3 and that 1/3 are. For example, the 1/3 could be really expensive studio accommodation, but it could be cheaper but still not affordable shared bathroom accommodation. For them, if that 1/3 was affordable accommodation, we'd lobby the university to decrease that rent to what the NUS affordability threshold is, and that is 50% of your max student loan, which works out at about £127 a week. At the moment, the cheapest rent at Lancaster University is £142 a week.
Now, one response which the university might give to you is that it's quite a tough time financially for a lot of universities in the UK. They're having to make a lot of cuts to staff numbers, budget's already very, very tight. The university might very well say that they've just not got the money to decrease rent at the moment. What would be your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is usually what the university says back to respective presidents when they say you should decrease campus rent. And what I would say back to that, sitting around these tables with the university, is that the university really should prioritise how much money students have more than anything else. Students at the moment, I know, I'm sure Josie knows, we all know that we all have no money. We're all penny pinching wherever we can. And at the moment, the university are just making that worse and worse by increasing rents over the contractual limits. So if I was elected, I'd sit around the table, I'd show them surveys, I'd show them open letters to demonstrate how the student body thinks about this and how much money the student body actually has. Once the university fully understand that, I think it's their duty to decrease campus rents to what they can afford to do.
But would their response not be that they can't afford to do anything at all there, that perhaps they've been raising rents to cover increased costs and things like that? I mean, could that not very well true or not be the university's response to that?
It definitely can. That is something that will definitely crop up. If the university genuinely cannot afford it, then I'm happy to say here that there's probably not much that can be done. In the end of the day, this does come down to the university's bottom line. We can ask them to decrease rent as much as physically possible. We can lobby as much as possible. We can show them as many studies as possible. But if the university cannot afford it, they're well within their rights to say, no, we aren't doing this. But like I've mentioned, I think the university should prioritise the money in students' back pockets over anything else.
Now, some tenants' unions, such as the one representing students in Manchester, there's been rent strikes. Is that a course of action you consider?
Yeah, so I've spoken to quite a few people that are involved in Manchester SU and MSRU, which is the Manchester University Renters Union. At the moment, the rent strike isn't even in my mind. It's not in my frame of mind. It's nothing that myself or Emily that are leading the campaign would even consider. But if campus rents keep increasing more and more, and students have less and less money in their back pockets, then this might be something we have to look at. But in the end of the day, the welfare and the safety of the students at hand have to be prioritised over anything else.
Now, if we stay on the topic of finance but move more to the university side of things, as I mentioned, it's quite a tough time for universities around the country. Lancaster's got a programme of voluntary redundancy in place, and there will have to be a lot of job cuts. It's very possible that in the next academic year we'll see strikes undertaken by the UCU, the Lecturers' Union. If that were to happen, would that be something which you would support as president of LUSU?
If I was president of LUSU, I wouldn't make the decision myself. I'd put a widespread survey, a widespread student consultation to see what the students think about this issue. I think the LUSU president should act in the interests of the students, but also with a bit of nuance. I don't think that the LUSU president should completely stand against strikes, but I don't think they should completely stand on one side. I think it should come to the students that we represent to decide what opinion we form. So, for example, I think it was Manchester Uni, they had some strikes a few years back and they did a widespread student referendum to try and ask what students think, and then their LUSU guidelines happened as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about postgraduate students, some of whom are simultaneously represented by LUSU and the UCU because they are both students at the university but also undertake teaching? If it's possible that LUSU wouldn't support strikes when postgraduate students are going on strike, how can LUSU claim to represent them?
LUSU, the postgraduate students have a postgrad board. I'm sure you know this, that's meant to represent postgraduate students. In the last few years, the postgrad board hasn't been very effective. I'm sure a lot of people would recognise this. In order to make sure that postgraduate students are fully represented in the union, I would empower the postgrad board as much as physically possible, speak to student leaders in the postgraduate college, speak to PhD students, speak to as many people as possible to try and understand what issues affect them, and then try and convey that back to the postgrad board, who can then represent them to the university and to the students' union.
But ultimately the union's duty is to represent them, and how can it do that if there's the potential that it wouldn't back them in strike action?
Yeah, I think that it's a very difficult situation to navigate. I'm sure former LUSU presidents have had to navigate this themselves, and it's certainly something that's a difficult situation. To to fully represent the issues of postgraduate students, we would have to take their opinions on board more than anyone else. Postgraduate students make up something like 29% of our university campus. They're integral to our university society, community, and there's no denying that postgrad students should need to be represented more than they are already.
Now, I understand, of course, like you've said, that you'd want to put it to a referendum to determine the SU's stance, but as for your personal stance, your personal opinion, would you support the UCU taking strike action as a response to these job cuts?
I'd have to investigate the actual strike action at the time, but usually I'm sympathetic to strike action.
Mm-hmm. And to move on to a similar issue, student protests. It's an issue which really came into the limelight last year. In particular, we had the pro-Palestine encampment in Alexandra Square for most of third term. Now, that was quite controversial at times. It took up quite a large portion of the square. There was a lot of vocal support and a lot of vocal opposition. Student protests such as that, are those things you can get behind as well?
Student protests are a little bit different in that students want to feel heard, and that's what student protests are. Student protests care about an issue. They want to convey that to the university, and it's the union's duty to support them as much as possible, but also to support the people that might be negatively affected by these protests. It's the union's duty to effectively support and represent every student on campus.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that includes large-scale protests or occupations potentially? Is that something which you think the SU ought to be getting behind if students are representing a just cause?
I think it depends on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the issue. It depends what the students at hand think. If the issue is passed to Union Assembly, which is the SU's version of Parliament for those that don't know, and it gets passed for Union Assembly because student leaders have voted on it, then there isn't much that the union can do to then say, no, we don't want to support this. So again, it would effectively come down to what the students think at the time and what the Union Assembly would vote on at the time.
And for instance, with the Palestine encampment, that did in the end come to Union Assembly, and I think I'd be correct in thinking that you were on Union Assembly at the time. Do you remember how you voted?
Yeah, so I voted for 3 of the points. I abstained on 1 of them. And that was to cut all ties with BAE. I abstained because during Union Assembly it came to more of a matter of debate on what engineering students want at their careers fairs rather than what's moral and just. We all admitted that it may not be moral and just to have defence contractors at careers fairs, but the discussion was more so about what engineering students want. Now, I'm not an engineering student, I'm mainly a politics student, so I didn't feel like I was best placed to represent those in careers fairs when I don't know much about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we move on to the issue of communications, it's one which quite a lot of candidates have mentioned, wanting to improve LUSU's communication with students. Could you explain in a bit more detail exactly how you'd like to go about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the conversation I've had with student leaders and my experience as a student leader per se in the last year or so is that a major downfall of LUSU and something that needs to be improved upon is not only transparency but communication as well. So, for example, touching on transparency, I've said in my manifesto that full-time officers will produce fortnightly reports. I think the majority of students at Lancaster University don't really know what full-time officers do. They don't know what they can do, they don't know what they can't do. I've known this, and when people are asking me what they think that the current full-time officer crop should and shouldn't do, this would help full-time officers be more accountable, be more open, and it would help students be able to see what they can and can't do and what they can and can't communicate to their full-time officers.
Where would you post those reports as well? There was quite a lot of documents do go up on the Students' Union website, but I imagine they probably don't get quite a lot of attention because it's hidden away in sort of the back pages of it all.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure we all know that the Students' Union website could do with some improvement. And because of that, I'd post the reports on Instagram in bite-sized forms. I would post them on the website just essentially for the sake of it, because some people are always going to read it, so it's always worth posting it on there. I'd also post them on maybe a TikTok. It's more accessible for a lot of students around campus. And I'd also try and pioneer a podcast with LA1 or Bailrigg FM in order for students to be able to listen to what their full-time officers do. As many ways as possible to hear these full-time reports and as many ways as possible to understand.
Now, if I could ask more broadly about relations between the SU and the student body as well. You've talked about, in particular, wanting to kind of reset the relationship between the SU and the colleges. Now, you've had experience in the past as the JCR president of county, so could you talk a little bit more about exactly what you think the problem is there at the moment and what you'd like to see done about it?
Yeah, I think there's problems on both sides. I don't think there's a single side that's to blame. I'm sure most people involved in the sphere knows that there is issues in the current makeup of the relationship. Keris has made steps to try and improve that with new committees. What I would do individually is to listen to the students at hand and try and figure out what they want to do, and then figure out an issue from that and implement a review straight away. In terms of the issues I've faced, I've often faced that it's quite hard to get a hold of certain members of the SU. I also feel like a lot of people communicate to me that they feel like that if they openly criticise the SU, then they're sort of shunned in a sense. And I don't know whether that's true, I don't know whether it's not true, but it's definitely something I'll be looking at. But they are definitely the communication complaints that I've heard so far.
And is that strictly in terms of relationships between the JCRs and LUSU, or do you think that goes more broadly for student bodies?
I'm involved in sports committee as well at the moment. So I hold a seat on sports committee which just decides certain sporting decisions around the university. I'm no longer a JCR president. But when I was JCR president, I often felt like at the time the issues were definitely exacerbated. JCR presidents by nature are a lot more political than those on sports committee and those on maybe society committee, I'm not sure. And I also feel like it's probably a more JCR tailored request, but I've also had numerous people come to me in sports and say, non-sports committee people, that is, come to me in sport and say they don't feel like they can get in a room with the SU. So again, what I do is create a room straight away where different sport leaders can come in and different society leaders, different JCR presidents come in and speak to me, speak to their respective officer and discuss to them what their issues are. That way we can make sure that we're student-led and student-focused as we should be.
You've mentioned in your manifesto as well wanting to protect college spaces. We've seen, of course, recently the closure of Lonsdale and Bowland bars on campus. So when you're talking about protecting college spaces, to you, does that involve pushing to reopen those bars or reopening those spaces in another form? Exactly, what does that look like?
I think it's something we'd have to look at. I think if it's possible to reopen them bars, I would be more than willing to support this as much as physically possible. But I understand that the university do have a bottom line. What I'd communicate to the university is that these spaces aren't businesses so much as they are Greggs or Spar. They're social spaces for students in that college. They're a community home. They've got a social benefit rather than just a fiscal benefit. And whether to provide that, we reopen the bars and allow them to be operating as they were before, or whether we work in conjunction with JCRs and college management to try and rejuvenate these spaces, I'm not sure, but the priority at the moment in time is to make sure that students feel at home in their spaces, in their college.
Now, we're fairly unique in Lancaster in that Shug House aside, there's not really any SU-owned bar on campus. A lot of universities will have a big central one, or some such as York, I believe, they've got smaller bars, but they are owned by the SU rather than the university, as they are here. Is that something which you'd like to see change? Is that something which you think is a practical change, or is that just a bit pie in the sky, do you think? To make a decision on this, we'd have to look at the finances of the Students' Union. I would love to have a smaller college/LUSU owned bar that's open to the students on campus. I think that would be a really great resource for those. I think there's a lot of people in the Students' Union and a lot of students on campus that would want this as well. Again, it's something I definitely want to do, but it just depends on how much money we've got at the time and how much money is available in order to actually complete this. And to speak briefly about the Sugar House as well, you've talked about wanting to restore the Sugar Bus, which has been a service which has been sort of on and off a couple of times now. How exactly do you want to go about bringing it back, and who'll be funding that? Yeah, I think something like the Sugar Bus, it is a vital component of student welfare and safety on nights out, and not only student welfare and safety on nights out, but student bottom line. I think the decision was made by the trustee board over the summer. In my opinion, it looked like they looked at the Sugar Bus as a cost, where I view it as an investment.
where if you have a free sugar bus that goes to sugar, you're going to get more people going to sugar, you're going to get more students feel safe on nights out, and it will make sure that the union is more student focused, like I mentioned a few times before. In terms of how I'd go about this, it's definitely a priority for me. I would make cuts in other areas maybe. I would try and bring in more money through LUSU owned businesses. I'm not sure on the actual route at the moment, but it's definitely something that I care about, something I'm passionate about, and something I think matters to students at the university.
Thank you very much, Ollie. I'm here with Rory, who's a mechatronic engineering student and the former president of Finesse College, who is running for president. So, Rory, why don't you just quickly walk us over your manifesto points?
Yeah, of course. I kind of start my manifesto by outlining the current climate that the university is in. We're undergoing the curriculum transformation programme at the moment, and we're about to have a new vice-chancellor, and we're obviously undergoing a lot of financial difficulties as well, both as a union and as a university and a wider sector. So starting with that basis, I think it's really important to get someone with experience in these roles into this sort of key student leadership role, to make sure that we start and carry on the right foot. So my manifesto points, sort of to go through the headlines. My first point is rent control. So it's a well-known fact. Rent's really high. Maintenance loans aren't high enough. In fact, over the last 5 years, maintenance loans have increased by about 10%, whereas in that same amount of time, campus rent has gone up by about 26%. To put that into perspective, 5 years ago, a student on the average maintenance loan living in standard accommodation would have had £1,500 spare to spend for the rest of the year, which is not much to begin with. Looking at next year, a student in that same boat of average maintenance loan and standard accommodation is looking at only having £500 spare for the entire year, which is not enough for food, let alone extracurriculars. It's locking up the student economy. Students can't afford to go out and spend their money. That's not helping the university, and it's not helping the students' union either. And it's not good for students. It's increasing stress. It's increasing mental health burdens on mental health services. So it's imperative that rent is controlled going forwards. Rent is actually not set by the university. It's set by UPP, which is a separate company. But just as we can sit in rooms with the university can sit down with UPP and explain to them this has gone too far and it needs to go back because students can't afford to live. So that's my first point. My second point is town safety for students. So crime rates are actually increasing in Lancaster. I've spoken to people who say that they feel less safe in Lancaster than they did even a year ago. The main crime committed in Lancaster, and the one that's most prevalent on the up, is sexual and violence crimes. The university likes to sit and protect the campus, but only around a third of students live on campus. The rest of them live in town. The university is one of the largest employers of the area, has the weight to lean on the city council, the county council, to put protections in place for students in town, and I will be lobbying the university to do that. My third point is to do with protecting student jobs. So it goes back to the economy and the student economy and the state of the sector. The university has proven that in their mission to cut costs, they need to make around £26 million of savings this year, around £30 million of savings next year. In that mission to cut costs, they are prepared to, we've already seen it, they've closed college bars, and as an impact of that, they have cut student working hours. They haven't officially fired anyone, but students who previously had shifts on bars are no longer getting shifts on bars, and in the current climate that's unacceptable. and I will make sure that student income isn't in the firing line in the future as the university pursues further cost cutting. Those 3 are written down on my manifesto. I have 2 additional points, which I couldn't write down because it's a 250 word limit. But as LUSU president, you oversee JCRs and PG board. So the colleges sit in that remit. The college system at Lancaster was designed when the university was designed. It was designed for a different demographic of student. It was designed for students with more spare time, more money, with less stress to get a good degree back in a time when not everyone had a degree in the world or in the country. And it hasn't really changed with that, especially over the last 20 years where student funding models have changed. And so I will work with the colleges to revamp what colleges do for a modern student demographic, because colleges are a unique selling point at the university. And actually, after Freshers' Week, the majority of students have nothing to do with their college, and then they graduate with their college, which it's a bit of a flop if you've made a lot of friends on your course that are in a different college and then you don't graduate with them. But equally, I think having come through the colleges myself, having come through the JCRs, I can see the value in them, and the value in the communities that they can provide, and in the sort of the third space that they can provide, to help student well-being, and to provide that extracurricular side that you don't necessarily get with a specific society. So I will work with the colleges to fix that and to create a new vision for colleges in a way that hopefully people will start to re-engage with, and it can become a successful feature of the university. And my final point on the manifesto is LUSU transparency. So a big frustration that I've had and a lot of people have had, and for me, being someone who works closely with the students' union, I'm a student trustee, so I have regular sort of high up meetings with the students' union, but I still feel like there are decisions that get made behind closed doors, decisions that affect students directly, that students aren't part of the decision making. And then those decisions, once they've been made, are enacted, and there is backlash because students weren't expecting it. And I would like to fix that. I'd like to get students involved in the decisions that affect them. The Students' Union has Union Assembly, which is a parliament, let's say, for the Students' Union. That's something that every student at the university can come to, but the majority of students don't even know it exists. And I think one way that can be improved is by, say, live streaming it. So you look at Prime Minister's Questions, for example, which is live streamed every week, and it means that you can see what's going on without having to be there. You can catch up on it if you missed it. And also, I would like to be more present about campus. I want to be an active union member who is visible on campus, who attends events, not just to show face, but because I care, and because as a representative of the student voice, I would like to be as visible as possible and as accessible as possible. So they're my key points.
So if we start off talking about protecting student jobs, obviously there's been the closure recently of Bowland and Lonsdale bars.
Yeah.
And as you say, no students have officially lost their jobs, but they've lost access to shifts, to a source of income. The difficulty is that these bars on campus, they're run by the university, just, well, in theory, turn a profit. Now, in reality, a lot of the bars haven't really turned a profit in quite a while, but with times being tight, the university's looking at things which are losing money, and they're the starting point for cuts. if you were to go to the university and say you need to be protecting student jobs, it's a valuable source of income, they might very well agree, but in a time of really austerity for the university, are they going to be open to supporting students if that just means losing money flat out, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, the way to look at this is, what sort of a student union would we be if we're not protecting student interests and we're not advocating for student interests? I would rather go into a meeting with the university and lay out to them how students need these jobs to eat and how them losing these jobs is unacceptable, and for them to not listen to me. Obviously I'd like them to listen to me, but I'd rather do that than not argue that point. I think it's, you've got to try to you've got to try, otherwise nothing will happen, right? So I suppose a better way of rephrasing it is, I would be advocating for student jobs. And it's not just bars. I'd like to think that they're done with the bars now and the bars are going to be set how they are. I suppose, you can't bank on that. But the university employs students in a lot of other ways, whether that's postgrad taught students, postgrad research students, or other students on the ERS, so student ambassadors. And all of those students are relying on this income to be able to eat, and to be able to afford the cost of living. And so if there's no one in that room telling the university that students need these jobs and you can't be cutting them, then they'll just carry on undeterred. At the very least, I'll make the university feel incredibly bad about cutting these jobs. So yeah.
Now, to ask you sort of a two-in-one question, talking about both rent control and advocacy for student safety in the city of Lancaster, those are both issues where you're wanting to impose sort of indirect pressure. If you want to pressure the university, to pressure the council to help make the city a safer place. You want to pressure the university to pressure UBP to not raise rents on student accommodation. These are both quite difficult things to do, because it requires not just putting pressure on the university, which is hard enough for the SU to do, but then the university to put pressure on external organisations outside of that. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is the most effective strategy to tackle these problems?
Well, obviously, if I'm invited to be in those rooms as well, then I would more than happily engage with the council and engage with UPP to negotiate these points. Where I think I will have some success is laying out the information to the university, for example, on the rent control, just how much rent on campus is locking up the student economy and affecting the university's income. Because the majority of this money goes to UPP. There might be a small profit margin on top that goes to the university, but you manage to negotiate UPP down, and suddenly you've got more money flowing for students to spend around the university. So to present it as a positive to both students and the university should encourage the university to go forward and make those negotiations, and I'm more than happy to be part of that negotiation. In terms of the town safety, again, the union advocates for what the students need, but it is the university that's the big employer in the area and has the weight and the backing behind them to make these to have these negotiations with the council. And again, if they need me in that meeting, then I'll be in that meeting. But it is the university with its weight in these negotiations that needs to be on board and needs to be negotiating it. Because if it's just the union, then looking realistically, we will have less success. So I do admit it'll be a difficult task, but a lot of this relies on the university cooperating with the union and recognising that the student voice in these matters is important, and it links all the way back to sort of the framing that I gave at the start, where I talked about CTP, the Curriculum Transformation Programme, and the new Vice Chancellor. If we don't get our foot in the door now, at this time of change, then we risk the university ploughing on ahead with its plans and leaving students in the dust. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of universities have announced that they'll be enacting staff cuts either through voluntary or involuntary redundancies because of rising costs and falling budgets for universities. It's likely that Lancaster will do the same thing, and it may very well be that as a response to that, the UCU, the Lecturers' Union, will choose to strike.
Mm-hmm.
If that were to happen, would you support the UCU?
So the university has already requested voluntary staff redundancies, and not enough were taken, and so the university has started laying off staff. As unions, I believe that we are stronger together. We are the students' union, so it is our job to represent the students. The UCU represents staff. There is some overlap with postgrad students, and I would definitely back anything that another union is saying, as long as it doesn't impede on the rights of students and the needs of students. So I would like to work with them, and because at the end of the day, we've got the common enemy. I don't want to say the enemy so much if the university's watching, but we've got the common ground of we're both campaigning the university as an employer, as an education provider, to provide what is best for its staff and for its students.
And would you say the same for student-led protests, such as the encampment by the pro-Palestine movement last year? If something like that were to happen again, maybe of the same cause, or maybe not,
mm-hmm.
Are you committed to backing student-led protest movements such as that?
Yeah, so the LUSU, as I'd say, has union assembly, which is its parliament structure, and we operate democratically. That being said, within that, the president and the other FTOs get their own vote in that. I can't preempt what protests will come, so I can't sit here now and say I'll back any student protest, but any student protest that the majority of students believe in should be backed by the union.
And in the case of the Palestine protest, you would have been on union assembly at the time as as the JCR president for Finesse.
Yeah.
Did you vote in favour of recognising their goals and motions at the time?
Yes, I did, yeah. And you can see my voting record in the minutes of those meetings as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rory.
Yeah, thank you.